Have you ever faced a situation where you need to implement a method but aren't sure how many arguments it should take? It can be quite confusing, right? If that sounds like you, stick around because today we are diving into how to implement a method with an unknown number of arguments in Java. I totally get it. Trying to figure out how to handle methods with varying parameters can feel like solving a puzzle without all the pieces. You're not alone in this struggle. Many developers encounter this challenge. Here's the specific question we're addressing today. One user asked how to implement an interface with a method that can take an unknown number of arguments. They provided an example with an interface and 3 classes, each trying to implement a transform method with different parameters. Sound familiar? Let's explore this together. So what's the issue here? The user wants to implement a method that can accept various types and numbers of parameters, but Java's strict type system makes this tricky. We'll break down how to achieve this while maintaining clarity and functionality. And don't go anywhere. By the end of this video, you'll not only understand how to implement this method, but also gain insights into best practices for handling variable arguments in Java. To implement a method that can handle an unknown number of arguments in Java, the user should start by defining the interface with a method that accepts a variable number of arguments. This can be done using the ellipsis syntax. Next, the user should create the classes that implement this interface. Each class can define its own version of the transform method, accepting different types and numbers of parameters. Now, to call the transform method generically, the user can create a method that takes an instance of the interface and an array of objects. This method will use reflection to invoke the correct transform method. Finally, the user should ensure that the method handles exceptions properly. This includes catching any potential reflection-related exceptions that may arise during the method invocation. Fun fact, did you know that Java was originally designed for interactive television? It has come a long way since then, evolving into one of the most popular programming languages today. Now, let's look at the answers provided by other users. This user suggests that if your interface method uses varargs, all implementing classes must do the same. They propose a solution where the transform method accepts a char array instead of varargs. This way, you can convert your inputs to char arrays before calling the method. The user also notes that while this solution works, it can lead to complicated code. They suggest that it might be simpler to create separate methods for different parameter counts instead of relying on varargs. Let's take a moment to review another user's answer. An alternative approach suggests modifying the interface to accept a variable number of arguments. The user proposes defining the transform method to take object arrays, allowing flexibility in the number of parameters. In the main method, instances of the classes can be created and the transform method can be called with varying arguments. This approach is particularly useful when using frameworks like Spring. That's all on that answer. Let's take a look at another one. This user suggests using method overloading if you know the maximum number of arguments. For example, you can create multiple implementations of the same method for 0, 1, or 2 parameters. If the maximum number of arguments is unknown, you can use a collection to store the arguments and pass that collection to the method. Another approach is to use varargs, which allows you to pass a variable number of arguments easily. This method can accept 0 or more arguments. Let's take a look at another answer from another user. An alternative approach suggested by a user involves using generics in your interface. They propose defining the interface with a type parameter, allowing each class to specify the type of arguments it will accept. That wraps up that answer. Let's move on to another one. An alternative approach to implementing a method with an unknown number of arguments is to use marker interfaces. A marker interface is one that has no methods, but provides runtime type information about objects. In this solution, the transform method takes an input parameter. You can create classes that implement this marker interface to pass as arguments. Finally, the transformer class implements the transformable interface and processes the input object, demonstrating how to handle varying input types effectively. Here's a pro tip. Always ensure that the parameters you pass to the transform method match the expected types in your implementation. This will save you from runtime errors and make your code more robust. And there you have it. You now know how to implement a method with an unknown number of arguments in Java. Remember, practice makes perfect. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe for more programming tips and tricks.